Hey guys, it's Tim. This time I'm back with another camera grip review. This one will be for Nikon's D600, and that's the MB-D14. This particular grip is made by DSTE Technology. I don't know if you guys recall, but I last reviewed their MB-D15 grip, and that was for the D700, and I was very reasonably impressed by it. So the build quality was pretty darn good. Of course, again, I didn't have Nikon's original to compare with, but based upon my analysis of it and teardown, I thought that it was a very high quality grip, especially in consideration of its price. So DST has now sent me two additional grips for review. The first one will be for the D600 and the other one will be for Canon 6D, as I'm currently evaluating both systems and deciding which one I'm going to stay with. Now the grip, as with the MB-D15 one, does come in a kind of generic nondescript box. It did come nicely in a bubble wrap, and the extra battery carrier was plastic wrapped here, plus additional cardboard to protect the contents from shifting while being transported. The instructions, as with the MB-D15 version, is extremely comprehensive, and it is in fluent English. There is no English here. One can perfectly read this through and thoroughly understand it. Digging into the grip itself, it's the little details that I usually like to highlight because it goes to show whether or not a manufacturer truly cares about all facets of its production process. So take for instance, this little piece here was placed here to protect the connector within, but given the price point and whatnot, you would imagine that they would probably have just as easily forego this as including it. So little nice touches like that I like to highlight only because, again, I feel like it really shows and demonstrates the care that the manufacturer went into for their products. Now, the major difference between this and the MB-D15 is the fact that the gearing has changed. So on this one, there's actually two smaller gears that rotate together in conjunction to operate the screw here, whereas on the D14, it's just one large giant screw and gear. I'll get this popped open later to see what makes that tick, but for now, covering off on the highlights of the grip, the major buttons that it reproduces is the shutter button here and a lock switch. So this prevents the grip, this buttons from being operated when it's in the locked state here. However, though, in direct contrast with the D600's switch itself, I really like this switch a lot. I've always loved the fact that I could just easily pick up the camera single-handed and just turn it on and just be able to take a picture right away. Whereas on the 6D, the on-off switch is actually over here, requiring two hands to operate. So one to flick the switch on and off, and then you would be able to take your picture thereafter. But one other thing I wanted to highlight was that the motion that one is accustomed to on the D600 or 7100 as well is a left to right, so a clockwise pattern to go from off to on. However, though, on this grip, a clockwise actually locks it, and then a counterclockwise flip actually deactivates the lock. So I felt like they should have reversed this. It should have conformed to the D600 that one is accustomed to, that when you flick it this way, it would become unlocked, and then when you flick it that way, it would become locked. Right underneath that shutter button is the main command dial, and as you can see, as compared to the D600, it's just a bit smaller. And also, the fact is that the D600 actually has almost like a rubber tacky feel to it. So it feels very nice, you get good traction on it. However, though, as I highlighted previously on the D15 grip review, this is just pure plastic. It almost feels like a Panasonic G5 that I had handled, and it's fairly smooth. These grooves here don't actually offer too much in the way of grip, but it's something to get used to, not the greatest. I would have preferred that these dials be the same texture as on the D600, but again, for the price, I'm not complaining. There is a auto exposure and autofocus lock button here, and this is the same as on the D600's back panel. There is a joystick on the back of the grip as well, and this one, like the D15 one that I had reviewed, also could benefit from just perhaps a little bit more travel, and the fact that the tactile feedback, while good for the main select, so this is the equivalent of you hitting the OK button. However, though, the directional buttons here is really, really sensitive. So if you press just a little too hard, it'll activate both the direction as well as pushing down on the OK. So that's something that I guess could be improved upon, although I'm not really sure how with this particular setup. Perhaps they could have made the OK button even more firm, meaning this one, although to be honest with you, I think that's firm enough, but perhaps if they had added more travel, it would have reduced the likelihood of both pushing the direction and the OK button in one shot. The bottom of the grip features the tripod mount, and there is no difference here in that it is also metal backed. So if peering in here, you can see that there is a metal plate that runs the full length of the grip to help support the tripod mount. The grip came with the AA battery holders installed, and as you can see here, there is a dry pack that, again, I just feel that it highlights the attention that's paid when they ship out their products. This carrier, as well as the lithium-ion holder, are basically identical to the D15. The only difference is the size of the actual grip itself. Those could be used interchangeably between the D15 and D14, so for those who have both of these, hopefully that should be a little nice touch if you don't want to carry it around too much equipment. But here's a direct side-by-side comparison. So one can't really blame a company for wanting to produce more money. The way they went about this is that slot there is a bit bigger. This is the D7100, the D15 meaning. This is D14, and this distance is slightly larger because the D600 is a larger camera after all. But overall, if they really had wanted to, they could have probably made the same fit. But again, in the end, there is a difference between these two. You cannot fit the D15 onto the D600/610, and likewise, you can't fit the D15 onto a D7100. And to clarify, by they I really mean Nikon, because this is Nikon's design after all. Both battery holders do have a metal prong here that matches the corresponding groove on the grip itself. To highlight what I mean, this prong fits into that groove, and I like the fact that it is metal, it's not plastic. So in case you do somehow manage to drop your camera and impact that corner, hopefully it should be a little bit more robust. And one nice touch that I had highlighted before is the fact that there is a coloring here to indicate that this is for the lithium ion and this is for 6AA, so that way if in case you have extras slot in your camera bag, you can easily discern which one is which. In the case of the lithium ion holder, there is a rubber flap here that you can remove, so that way in case you use an adapter instead of a battery, that routes the wire through that. I like the fact that there is a rubber grommet here that should hopefully help with weather sealing. However though, there will be other areas where there's major holes, such as the command dials, the sub dials, any area where the buttons can go in, although there is a rubber piece underneath here, so that's not too bad. However, that hole, as well as the one for the command dial, the main gear itself. However, one area I would have liked to have seen weather sealing would be around the edges here for the battery compartment. But overall, because of the flare that is here, water ingress shouldn't be too problematic. Plus, not to mention, again, that is not the only point. It's here as well as the command dials. The original battery mounts easily enough by just placing it into the holder, pushing down, and sliding it forward into it locks. Installing the grip itself is a relatively simple affair. You simply line up this metal prong here into the corresponding hole, and then lining it up, pushing it down, and just rotating that giant screw wheel. And as soon as the connector makes contact, you will see a brief flashing to indicate that that connection has been made. As with the D15, I found it easiest to just apply some pressure with the camera upside down to the grip to get maximum contact. So with the grip installed, I'm going to go ahead and test the flex, and I'm applying a fair amount of pressure here. There is minimal flex there. Of course, given this is the point furthest away from the tripod mount, there will probably be the most flex in this corner right here, as you can see. But overall, it feels very solid. It doesn't feel like it's going to be loose or anything like that. So now to test the functionality of the grip, first off we're going to test the shutter button to make sure that it's accurate. The shutter button does have a decent feel to it. It has a very distinct stop where you could tell where you've reached your half press and where's your full press as well. So here I'm just going to aim at different areas to acquire focus. And you can see it responds pretty normally. So no issues there. Next, we're going to test the auto exposure, auto focus lock. And I'm going to acquire a reading 1/60th. And as you can tell, it doesn't change the shutter speed until I let go of it. So that works fine. And then next, we're going to test this joystick. So as mentioned, if there was one weakness of this grip, it would be this joystick. You would kind of need to have a certain level of finesse to gently nudge the control. I don't know if you heard that just now. That was actually me pushing left and pushing down at the same time. So as long as you're a little bit more delicate about it and gentle about it, you shouldn't have that problem. So that's a full press. And these are just directional choices. So let me actually go into image preview and then zoom in. So overall, it does function flawlessly, with the exception that, as mentioned, it could probably just use a little bit more, I guess, travel, number one, and number two, perhaps being a little bit firmer in certain aspects so you don't accidentally push a direction and push down in the center at the same time. As previously mentioned, once you set this to lock, none of these buttons will work. So say the shutter, nor the auto exposure lock. Nothing's being locked there, nor the joystick. So it completely locks it out. The rest of the controls on the camera itself will still function normally with the grip in the locked out state. Next up, we're going to test the main command dial as well as the sub dials. So right now I have this in manual mode. The command dial controls the aperture. So as you can see, it responds very accurately. If I go 3 clicks, 3 changes, 2 clicks, 2 changes, up, down. So it's fairly responsive and accurate. It's not jumping a few. As you can see, the aperture change correspond with the clicks. Next would be this sub dial here. I would say the sub dial is just slightly less precise than the main command dial, but overall not bad. As you can see here, same thing, it's corresponding to the amount of clicks with the very occasional hiccup, which I notice it'll either skip one or again not acknowledge one of the scrolls. In terms of the fit and finish, since I don't have the original grip to compare it with, let's just look at Nikon's D600 and see how it's implemented versus the grip. So to start off with, the finish, if you could see here, it pretty much matches directly. One really wouldn't be able to discern any difference in real life. Here's a close-up to see how the rubber fits into the plastic over here on the D600, and as you can see, it does a very good job. There is almost no raised edges or any type of glue overrun. Although I would probably say that this end here probably fits more flush than this end here, which is slightly raised. And by contrast, here's the DSTE grip. Overall, the fit and finish is quite good, as I had discovered with their first grip that I purchased. This one, as you can see here, there's perhaps a very small little gap there and some very little messiness over here, but overall don't really see too much in the way of glue overrun. The rubber does meet the plastic relatively flush for the most part. It's probably very slightly raised here. Apologies, I have the exposure set on shutter, so that's why whenever my finger appears into here and the metering will go off. The gaps are all reasonable. There's probably just another tiny little gap over there. So far I don't really see much in the way of glue overrun. Again, focusing on the edges between where the rubber meets the plastic, and likewise for that edge running there. If there was one area that I thought wasn't quite up to par with the rest of the grip, is the fit of the battery holder itself, because there is a bit of play, and when you're sliding it in, if you're too far to the right or too far to the left, it doesn't align perfectly. So sometimes you just got to be a little bit mindful about how you insert it in. Case in point, I have this pushed to the right now. Trying to push it in doesn't quite fit flush, so just kind of have to align it a little bit and it'll fit in perfectly. As with their D15 grip, I just find that one would really be hard pressed to tell that this is a aftermarket grip versus the original. But again, caveat that I don't have a original to compare with. I did have this set to use the grips battery at the onset of the review, and as can be seen here underneath the battery info, looks like that worked. There's 87% left on the D14 versus 100%. Now the shutter count there, 20, I think those were taken before I started review. So now it's time to get the top plate off with a pH 0 to see how the gears are arranged. So with that top plate off, now we get to see the innards of the grip. The first thing I usually like to check is just to see how the soldering job is. Since most of these are all surface mounted, not too bad. I think the only exception I found is perhaps this one right here. It's potentially a cold solder joint. For those not familiar with that term, it just simply means that potentially this piece shifted during soldering and that it didn't cool off in a way that is truly solid. It may be a little bit more brittle than usual, but given that that part is not susceptible to movement or vibration, hopefully that won't be a major issue. The rest of the soldering is all pretty good until we get to this part here, which, as I had highlighted on my D15 review, this entire assembly is a little bit delicate because that acts as a master on-off switch for this here. The spring lever, if you go see, as you lock the battery into place, there are two metal tabs that come together to complete the circuit here that routes the electrical path. So overall, this isn't the exact most robust of piece, but hopefully it shouldn't be an issue. We'll see how it holds up in the long run. I don't know why they changed the design of the D14 to the D15. The D14 has just one giant screw here, this wheel, and that turns a whole bevy of gears to turn the tripod mount. However, though, I wish they had used a different ratio because this takes so many turns just to mount onto the camera itself. The most important thing, though, is this metal plate right here. The fact that it's actually held down by 4 screws versus just melted plastic. As John Moyer had highlighted on his grip, he had a generic one, I think it was a Pixel, if I'm not mistaken, and that he mentioned was held only by melted plastic here. So overall, that was very weak, whereas this is actually held by 4 screws. The reason that's significant is because as you mount this, all of that pressure is being applied here, so it pulls upwards, and then that force is applied to these 4 screws here. However, though, in this case, I feel that the actual screws, coupled with the fact that hopefully this top plate is pretty form-fitting, so as you mount this to the base of the camera, this goes up into the camera's base pushes down on this plastic plate. Hopefully the metal piece within is form-fitting and touching this plastic piece, so it would minimize the amount of upward force being applied as you tighten this. Given what I've seen of the D15, I'm reasonably confident that this should stand up to heavy use, but again, we'll see in the long term how this holds up. As an initial conclusion, I give this grip high grades. I really like the quality. It's, while not perfect, it's pretty darn good. For the most part, as mentioned, you could barely tell that this is an aftermarket grip when you have it mounted. So a few key things that I would like to see changed is, one, to make this a little bit operate more smoothly going in and out, tighten up the tolerances perhaps, so that way it would always slot in without, your intervention of finagling it. Secondly, as I had highlighted on the D15 review as well, is I wish the base that coupled with the end of the camera was more form-fitting in the sense that it was extended out to match here. Of course, that does mean the grip will be a little bit larger overall, but perhaps there could be a taper outwards or whatnot, because I just feel that that would give it even more stability. Although it isn't too bad, as mentioned, the flex isn't too bad overall. Obviously almost none here at the tripod mount, and perhaps a little bit here at the very extreme edges. I am applying a fair amount of force, but it's not something that I would feel during actual operation. It does feel very solid to me in my hands. And perhaps if it was widened a little bit, the base could also be extended out just a teensy bit, because currently I have a 24-85 mounted, kit lens mounted, and the center of gravity, as you can see, is toppling forward already, even though this isn't a particularly large lens. Of course, keeping everything in perspective, that would make the overall grip bulkier and heavier, so it is fine the way it is. It's just my personal opinion. Additional changes I would like to see is perhaps change the ratio of these gears so that it doesn't require that many turns to engage, fully engage. I think I counted something upwards of over a dozen turns or perhaps a little bit more. So, hey, time saving is time saving. In the end, it's not a deal breaker, but still something to look forward to if they do incorporate that. The joystick, as previously mentioned, is perhaps the only Achilles heel of this grip. This action here could probably stand to be just a little bit more refined. It's not bad, but again, it does require a delicate thumb to operate. If you're heavy-handed, you're probably likely going to accidentally push it down versus directionally left or right or up or down. This button, I would like to see it firmed up just a little bit more. And the command dials, while again operate smoothly, I would have liked them to apply the same type of tack that is on the actual D600's command dials. And last but not least, I would have liked to see this operate in the same way as the D600, in the sense that clockwise turns it on. Likewise for here, clockwise, I would have liked to have seen it disengage lock versus locking. Overall, though, at the end of the day, all of those things I cited are more wish list items than any faults with the actual grip itself, with perhaps, again, the exception of the joystick. But it is a joy to use. I do like the additional mass that it provides over here because it gives a very comfortable grip. As with the D7100, I've found that the D600's grip over here is just a little bit shallow. And again, I don't have large hands, I have medium-sized hands, but I feel that it could have benefited to be a little bit more beefier like on the Canon 6D. Bottom line is, if you're looking for a solid grip for your D600 or D610, since those two should be 100% compatible in terms of the base, I would highly recommend the DSTE. As part of FTC disclosures, the DSTE MB-D14 was provided by DSTE Technology for review. Thanks again for watching.